Good morning, friends, chess players, and welcome back. Today we have an appointment with middle game strategy, and we're going to look at a game, nothing less than one played by Magnus Carlsen. We're going to consider three rules, if only there were just three. Today we'll look at three that I have, let's say, decided to apply to this game. So, without further ado, the game is very interesting because it will give you a preview of a game coming next week. In fact, our friend Magnus Carlsen plays... What does he play? The Jobava attack. Specifically, after a 6 and e3 and c6, now comes a move that with pleasure. I'll tell you, in 2017, this was my own theoretical novelty. In fact, this move was played for the first time by me in a tournament game, which was also very important. I won't spoil it for you because it will be next week's game. And in this position, I want to immediately introduce the first strategic concept. Because here the move is very strange, but it is justified, fully from this concept which we often ignore. That is to say, let's give ourselves this very first fundamental rule. Either focus on developing your own pieces or work to actively hinder your opponent's development. And here we truly enter this quite particular world, because when we talk about the concept of development, well, usually we're thinking about things like develop the knight, develop the bishop, get the king to safety by castling, and so on and so forth. So let's say these are the moves that come to mind. Instead, we have to remember that in chess we're not playing alone, so while we develop our pieces and feel satisfied, we're actually playing against an opponent. So if we make moves that in some way hinder our opponent's development, it's as if we've achieved the same thing ourselves. Because let's suppose that right now the score is 0-0. I develop one piece, my opponent develops one piece, I develop a second piece, my opponent develops a second piece as well. At a certain point, instead of just making another developing move, say my third, I make a move hop that disrupts my opponent's development. So while my opponent was at 2, in this sort of progression we're describing, they drop back to 1. So let's say that preventing or hindering your opponent's development is just as good as developing something of your own. And sometimes we forget this because we're often focused on placing our own pieces well, and we forget in fact that there are two players in the game. All this introduction is to justify to you a move that here is also one of Stockfish's best. In fact, it definitely was in 2017 when I discovered this novelty, and it probably still is, which is the move g4. This specific strategic maneuver, which is very much in the true characteristic spirit of the Jobava opening, is a move that aims precisely to try to effectively challenge and undermine the positioning of this knight. Here on f6, what is Black's problem in this position? Black, of course, would like to avoid getting caught out. This g5, unfortunately, the move h6 here is quite disastrous because after playing h6, Black basically will never be able to castle again. Kingside, because obviously White will always have the move g5 with which they can open the g-file. So this is the real problem with Black's position. Black can't really play the move h6. And so essentially Black is forced here. Black played c5, so he is forced to accept the consequences that White, thanks to the move g5, let's say, manages to disrupt Black's development, with Black being forced to retreat with his pieces. You see how interesting this position is for White. I've played it a lot, and with a lot of success, especially in fact in those years 2017 to 2018. Basically, White is starting to launch this attack, while in the meantime, Black has already somewhat weakened himself on the queen side. So really, Black's king can't castle long and has some trouble castling short. At least visually, you can already see that White is dominant on the king side. And I can tell you that on a practical level, this position, which objectively and with preparation is obviously perfectly playable for Black, is in practice very difficult to handle. We'll also see this in my game next week. Carlsen here continues with h4, so he supports the pawn and obviously also gains squares for his pieces. Not that he wants to put them there immediately, but certainly h4 is a move that can't be wrong. Knight to c6, knight to f3, so now finally Carlsen also starts developing his other pieces. Here we see... So I don't want you to go against the rules, but I do want to try to help you understand how to interpret the game of chess, because in the opening moves, right, everyone says you need to develop your pieces, castle, and get your king to safety. In this game, as you can see, White has done something completely different. Let's say they're far from being safe, and instead of developing the pieces, they've pushed the pawns forward. However, always remember what I tell you about dynamism. What is dynamism? It's connected to the concept of space, the activity of the pieces, Let's evaluate this right away. You see, black's pieces are all still at home. So what does it mean that black doesn't have any dynamism? Why is that? Black won't be able to create an attack on white's position in the short term. So white doesn't have any urgent need to secure their king because black's pieces aren't ready yet. So yes, I like the classic rules, develop the pieces, castle quickly, and so on and so forth. But we have to combine all of this with other chess theories. In my opinion, the theory of dynamism is very important because if our opponent doesn't have this dynamism, I don't have the urgency to develop my pieces. And as you can see, in this position, Carlsen first thought about bothering his opponent with this g4 and g5, pushing forward with his attack. Because after all, he's not risking anything with his king because black has absolutely no dynamism at this moment. This is to justify certain things for you, right? Classical principles versus principles. Should we call them hypermodern? Let's call them hypermodern. Anyway, let's continue with the game. Bishop e7, and you see Carlsen continues with h5. That's what I mentioned earlier. At the moment, black has no potential prospects. No dynamic play, so I do not have the urgency to play queen d2 and castle long. And to put the king to safety. So Carlsen stabilizes the situation on the king side and makes it clear, this side is mine, you need to be very careful. And here I'll tell you that the move black should have played according to the computer, the one that gives black an equal game, is, in my opinion, a really complicated move from a practical standpoint. In fact, the GM with black didn't play it, because in this position, the correct move for black would have been to castle short. I have to say that it's not easy to castle short here, because white has already placed a pawn on g5 and another on h5, so he has already brought all his offensive potential to bear. Now he can bring in the rest, the bishop can go to d3, then white can castle long, and so on and so forth. It's a bit scary to castle short, but in reality, black doesn't really have, let's say, nothing better to do, so here he has to castle short and then try to go on the attack a bit. Even here, try to open up this f-file, taking advantage of the fact that if black plays g6, maybe he plays h6 and keeps everything blocked. But in any case, I can assure you that playing this way without maybe the computer preparation telling us, okay, play like this, it's fine, nothing will happen to you, honestly, it's a bit difficult. And in fact here, moreover, here black makes a mistake that reminds us of the Fischer video I made for you about Fischer's rules. So I'll put this as rule 1b, don't exchange when you gain nothing. Because in this position, black plays c takes d4, which is a move that basically achieves nothing. It simply relieves the pressure on white's center and opens another file. So here, the move is not good. So black should have either castled short, which I repeat is already a fairly complex move to make, or in the worst case scenario, anyway, b5 is played and then we'll see c takes d4. In any case, here it's a mistake and we have to say it. And at this point, black still plays b5, so let's introduce this second rule of the day. Always ask yourself, what is your opponent doing? What does your opponent want to do? The more attentive among you will remember that we applied this rule in the Fischer video as well. Among Fischer's rules, however, of course, is the rule of prophylaxis, one of the most important rules in chess. And here too, it is very important. What does our opponent want to do after playing b5? Well, what might he want to do? b4 is definitely a move I need to consider. What's the problem? That when our opponent plays b4, knight to a4, which is probably the correct move, might not seem so obvious, right? Because maybe the knight is a bit off to the side, maybe I'm not so happy to put the knight there. On e2, the problem is that I block my bishop. I can no longer put the bishop on d3. So what does Carsten do? He sees this plan from his opponent and says, alright, you know what? I'll play bishop to d3 first. So now if you play b4, I still keep the e2 square for my knight, but I've managed to place the bishop where I wanted. Knight to b6 again. Ask yourself, what is my opponent trying to do? Well, definitely the opponent is trying to bother us on the c4 square. Then he also attacks the b2 square, so Carsten obviously plays b3. Black plays bishop to d6. Here, black is in a bad position with bishop to d6. Maybe it's not the right move, but there really aren't many other alternatives either. So he played bishop to d6, and at this point, let's go back to the rule again. Don't exchange when you gain nothing. Do we need to exchange? Absolutely not, because by exchanging, black activates his queen, and there's no reason to do that. And so here, Carlsen plays queen to d2, queen to c7, and at this point, we can finally castle, and on i5, king to b1. This move is famous. When you castle long, you then shift the king further to the side to defend weaknesses. Black also tries to launch his own offensive with a 4, but now white has arrived as well and fires off the move g6. Now perhaps comes one of the last important moments of this game. And more than a moment, excuse me, it's an evaluation, because now I'm going to introduce rule number 3, which is more of an assessment that we give to this game. Actually, let me show you the previous position. Let me show you this position here. Keep all your pieces connected and defended. Look at white's pieces. White's pieces are developed in a very harmonious way. The pieces defend each other. You see how the bishop attacks, but also helps with the push to g6. The knight defends the center, but also helps with occupying the e5 square. Now let's look at black's pieces. The bishop isn't doing anything. The rooks are not coordinated. The knight is here and can't go anywhere, and it's not coordinated with any other piece either. The only coordinated pieces are the queen, which is defending the bishop. Other than that, even the knight isn't coordinated with anything. The knight on c6 is not even defended. So you see, that's why this position is very good for white. Because there is a lack of coordination. In other words, white is very well coordinated, while black has all their pieces not working together. So the third rule, more than a rule we're going to apply, is an evaluation of this game. That is, white is getting the upper hand because they always have all their pieces better coordinated compared to black's. So let's go back to this position after a takes b3, and let's refer back to another video I made for you, which is about the 5 rules for defending. In chess, do you remember that I showed you a technique called opening the 7th? How should white recapture here? Well, definitely with the c-pawn, because now white has opened the 7th and is going to defend his weaknesses. If he had captured with this pawn, you can see how white's pieces wouldn't be participating in the defense. And here, simply, black with the move queen to a7 would have already won the game. So remember, defensive technique, opening the 7th. And at this point, Carlsen plays on bishop 6, he plays bishop takes a6. In the previous rule, we told you not to capture if you don't gain anything. However, here look, black has a threat. Let's suppose I make a random move. Here, black is threatening to capture the bishop, and afterwards the other bishop remains to defend. So here Carlsen plays bishop takes a 6, which might seem unnecessary because it could activate the opponent's rook. But in reality, it is necessary. It is because in this case there was an attack. And so you see, we shouldn't be extremists from this point of view, so we capture because there was a tactical problem. And at this point, Carlsen plays h6 to try to break through on the king side and on bishop to f4. If you want, pause the video here because a truly spectacular combination of moves is coming up. Here comes h takes g7, attacking the rook. Now black can't capture the queen because white recaptures the queen with check and then takes the rook. Sorry, obtaining a new queen with check. So black has to move the rook to g8. But at this point, rightly so, Carlsen poses the same problem again, right? Again, we can't capture because once more there's a queen with check, so the queen reappears on g8. Okay, this actually happened in the game. Black did capture anyway, but Carlsen first took this, then took that. And here he promoted to a second queen, and obviously black resigned. There are 1,000 threats in this position, so there's not much to be done. Do you see how in this game, simply put, we've seen many interesting themes that are sometimes underestimated. So I wanted to show them to you also as a preview of what you'll see next Friday, because you'll see the same variation. So I hope you enjoyed this game, these rules, this analysis. If you want to support the channel, you know what to do. Subscribe, like, and leave a comment. And I'll see you in the next videos.